The golden afternoon light streamed through the tall library windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fairies. Elena Morgan adjusted her glasses, her gaze drifting across the children's section, where the usual after-school chaos was beginning to settle into quiet reading corners. That's when she noticed the new girl. Not new in the sense of her first visit. Elena had seen her several times this month, but new in the way she carried herself. While other children clustered around picture books or begged for the latest graphic novel series, this child moved with a quiet intensity that didn't match her small frame. She couldn't have been more than 9, with dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail and eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her without ever quite meeting anyone else's gaze. She moved directly to the nonfiction shelves, her small fingers tracing spines with a purpose that felt all wrong for a child her age. Elena watched as the girl pulled down a thick volume about wilderness first aid, her expression so serious it made Elena's librarian heart ache just a little. There was no excitement in her discovery, only grim determination. The book was clearly meant for adults, with dense text and technical diagrams, yet the girl carried it to a reading table as if it were her assigned homework. As she began taking notes in a small composition book, her brow furrowed in concentration, Elena felt the first subtle prickle of concern. This wasn't normal childhood curiosity. This was something else entirely. Maya became part of the library's daily rhythm, as regular as the grandfather clock, chiming each hour in the lobby. Every afternoon at 3:45, the heavy glass doors would swing open, and she would appear, always alone, always carrying the same worn blue backpack that seemed slightly too large for her small shoulders. She never lingered at the entrance or browsed the new arrivals display like the other children. Her movements were efficient, purposeful, a direct line to the 600 section where the practical life skills books lived. Elena began to notice patterns in her selections. Mondays were for foraging guides and edible plant identification. Tuesdays focused on weather patterns and storm preparedness. Wednesdays brought books on basic shelter construction and knot tying. Thursdays were medical texts, first aid, wound care, emergency procedures. Fridays, she would check out the thickest volumes, the ones about long-term food storage and water purification, as if preparing for a weekend without resources. The contrast with other young patrons couldn't have been more striking. While second grader Tommy giggled over Captain Underpants, and the twins from down the street debated which rainbow magic fairy book to borrow next, Maya studied diagrams of solar stills and memorized lists of poisonous berries. She never asked for help finding anything, never approached the desk with questions about summer reading programs or story guides. Hours. Her world within the library consisted of that one aisle, that one table in the corner, and the silent absorption of survival knowledge that no child should need to possess. Elena started making subtle adjustments to her own routine, shelving books in adjacent sections, offering general greetings that Maya would acknowledge with a quiet nod but never reciprocate. The pattern continued week after week, this solitary child arming herself with knowledge far beyond her years, while other children simply enjoyed being children. It was the book on identifying poisonous mushrooms that finally pushed Elena to cross a professional boundary she normally respected without question. She waited until Maya had left for the day, the heavy field guide safely tucked into her backpack alongside that week's other selections, a manual on emergency shelter building, and a text about purifying contaminated water. The library had grown quiet in the late afternoon lull, the only sound the soft hum of computers and the occasional page turned from the few remaining patrons. Elena pulled up the circulation system, her fingers pausing over the keyboard. Privacy was a sacred trust in libraries, but so was protecting children. She typed Maya's name into the patron database, her breath catching slightly when the checkout history loaded. The list spanned back 6 months, a chronological catalog of concern, not a single work of fiction, not one picture book, no magazines or audiobooks, only practical manuals, survival guides, and technical texts. The timeline told its own disturbing story. It began with basic camping and outdoor skills books in September, progressed to emergency preparedness by October, advanced to foraging and wilderness medicine through the winter months. The most recent entries showed a sharp turn toward crisis management, books about surviving power outages, navigating without GPS, even one about identifying safe drinking water in urban environments. Each checkout period aligned with school breaks or 3-day weekends. Elena scanned the dates, her stomach tightening as she recognized the pattern. Thanksgiving break had featured books about food preservation. The winter holiday checkouts focused on cold weather, survival, and treating hypothermia. The upcoming spring break? Maya had just borrowed materials about weather patterns and storm preparedness. The realization settled over Elena like a heavy blanket. This wasn't academic interest or hobby research. This was a child preparing to be alone, preparing to survive. The next afternoon, Elena prepared herself differently. She brought from home a plate of oatmeal cookies, the kind her own grandmother used to make, and placed them on the corner of the reference desk with a small sign that read, "After School Boost." She watched Maya enter at her usual time, make her usual beeline for the survival section, and begin her usual methodical search. Elena took a deep breath, selected a book about local bird species, benign, neutral territory, and approached the table where Maya had already spread out her materials. "Finding everything you need today?" Elena asked, keeping her voice light as she pretended to reshelf the bird book nearby. Maya looked up, her eyes wide with what might have been surprise or alarm. She nodded quickly, pulling her current book, A Guide to Urban Foraging, closer to her chest as if protecting it. "Yes, thank you." Elena gestured to the cookies. "Help yourself if you'd like. I baked them this morning." The child's eyes flickered toward the plate, but she shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm not hungry." "It's quite an interesting subject you're studying," Elena ventured, nodding toward the book. "Do you have a project for school?" Maya's fingers tightened on the book's cover. "Just reading. Your parents must enjoy camping and outdoor activities." Elena tried again, leaning against the shelf casually. "I always loved family camping trips when I was your age." The child's expression closed off completely then, her gaze dropping to the table. "They travel for work." "Must be difficult when they're away," Elena said softly. Maya's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. "I manage fine." She gathered her materials with sudden efficiency, stacking books and closing notebooks with finality. "I should go." Elena watched her retreat toward the exit, the urban foraging guide clutched tightly against her chest. The interaction had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had told Elena everything she needed to know. The guarded responses, the defensive body language, the immediate retreat when the conversation turned toward home life. And that phrase, "I manage fine." No 9-year-old should need to manage anything. They should be cared for, protected, nurtured, not managing. In the days that followed, Elena began noticing details she had previously overlooked. The practical aspects of Maya's presence that spoke volumes about her home situation. The thin spring jacket she wore, even on unseasonably cool days, the kind of lightweight windbreaker that offered little real protection against the lingering chill of early spring. The worn backpack with a broken zipper that she had to hold closed with a safety pin. The way she always arrived precisely at 3:45 and never left until the 5:30 closing announcement, as if the library represented a specific block of time she needed to fill. Elena observed how Maya never mentioned play dates or after-school activities, never talked about soccer practice or music lessons like the other children. When a group of girls from her school came giggling into the library to work on a group project, Maya visibly shrank into her corner, keeping her head down until they passed without noticing her. She never bought snacks from the vending machine, never had spending money for the book fairs, never asked about the summer reading program prizes. Her entire existence in the library was functional, utilitarian, a means to acquire knowledge rather than a place to experience joy. Most telling was her relationship with closing time. While other children groaned when the first warning announcement came, "The library will close in 15 minutes," Maya's reaction was different. Elena watched her one evening as the announcement echoed through the quiet space. Maya's shoulders tensed, her movements slowing rather than speeding up. She reshelved her books with meticulous care, organized her notes with deliberate precision, adjusted the straps of her backpack multiple times. It wasn't the reluctance of a child enjoying her time reading. It was the hesitation of someone with nowhere better to go. The dread of what came after the library closed its doors. Elena found herself making extra work those evenings, finding reasons to delay, locking up for an extra few minutes. Watching from the window as Maya walked alone toward the apartment complex 3 blocks away, her small figure growing smaller still against the gathering dusk. The pattern of Maya's isolation became clearer with each passing day, painting a picture that went beyond simple shyness or bookish tendencies. Elena began to notice how other children instinctively gave Maya a wide berth, not out of meanness, but because she projected an invisible barrier that said, "Do not approach." During the library's weekly read aloud session, where children typically jostled for spots on the colorful carpet, Maya would choose a chair at the very back, close enough to hear, but separate from the group. When the storyteller asked questions or encouraged participation, Maya would shrink into herself, her knowledge clearly evident in her attentive eyes, but never voiced aloud. Elena watched one afternoon as a well-meaning volunteer tried to include Maya in a craft activity. The woman approached with colorful paper and markers, inviting her to join the other children making Mother's Day cards. Maya's reaction was subtle, but telling. A slight stiffening of her shoulders, a quick shake of her head, eyes darting toward the exit as if calculating escape routes. "No, thank you," she murmured, already gathering her survival guides like protective armor. "I need to study." The volunteer smiled understandingly and moved on, but Elena saw the truth behind the refusal. This wasn't preference. This was self-preservation. A child who doesn't make Mother's Day cards is often a child without a mother to receive one. The weather turned rainy that week, and Elena observed how Maya's arrival patterns shifted. On dry days, she walked from school, arriving precisely at 3:45. On rainy days, she appeared earlier, sometimes by 3:15, her hair damp and jacket soaked through, as if she'd left school immediately when the clouds gathered rather than waiting under cover. One particularly stormy afternoon, Elena found her in her usual corner, shivering slightly in wet clothes, intently studying a book about treating hypothermia. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Here was a child learning to recognize and treat the very condition she was currently experiencing. "Would you like a towel?" Elena asked, keeping her voice casual as she approached with a clean library towel she kept for such emergencies. "We don't want you catching a chill." Maya looked up, her expression guarded. "I'm fine. The book says your body can handle being cold for a while if you stay dry." She said it with such clinical detachment that Elena felt a pang of sorrow. This wasn't theoretical knowledge for Maya. It was lived experience. "That's true," Elena said gently. "But being comfortable while you learn is important too." She placed the towel on the table between them. "No sense being uncomfortable when you don't have to be." After a long moment, Maya reached for the towel, drying her hair with efficient motions. "Thank you," she said quietly, and for the first time, Elena saw a crack in the careful composure, a glimpse of the child beneath the survivalist. The moment passed quickly as Maya returned to her reading, but it lingered with Elena, that small acknowledgement of need, however reluctantly given. The following Monday brought another telling detail. Maya arrived with a small, carefully wrapped bundle that she kept beside her at the reading table. Throughout the afternoon, Elena watched as she occasionally touched it, as if reassuring herself of its presence. When Maya went to select another book, Elena caught a glimpse of the bundle's contents: a toothbrush, a small tube of toothpaste, and a clean pair of socks. The everyday items of childhood transformed into precious commodities that needed guarding. A child who carries her hygiene supplies with her is a child uncertain of what she'll find when she returns home. Elena began discreetly noting these observations in a small notebook she kept at the reference desk. Not dates and times, but patterns and behaviors. The way Maya's eyes sometimes had dark circles beneath them on Monday mornings. The fact that she never discussed weekend activities like other children. The way she carefully conserved her school supplies, using both sides of every piece of paper, her pencils worn down to small nubs before she asked the librarian for another. These were not the habits of a thrifty child. They were the adaptations of someone who couldn't take resources for granted. The most poignant moment came during the library's annual book sale, when discarded volumes were offered for a quarter each. While other children begged parents for spending money to buy picture books and young adult novels, Maya moved through the tables with a different purpose. Elena watched her carefully counting coins from a small change purse, selecting not stories or adventures, but practical manuals. A book about basic home repairs, another about container gardening, a worn copy of a nutritional guide. She passed over colorful covers and exciting titles. Her choices focused solely on utility and function. When her coins ran out, she stood for a long moment, looking at a book about emergency plumbing repairs, her fingers tracing the price sticker. Elena nearly intervened, nearly offered to pay for it herself, but something held her back. The sense that charity might damage the fragile dignity this child clearly clung to. Instead, she watched as Maya reshelved the book, with obvious regret, her shoulders slumping slightly before she straightened them and returned to her corner table, empty-handed. That evening, Elena found herself unable to concentrate on her own work, seeing instead the image of that small figure making practical choices no child should have to make. She thought about the emergency plumbing book, about why a 9-year-old would need such knowledge, and felt the weight of her concern deepening into something more urgent. This was no longer just about a child with unusual reading habits. This was about a child building a fortress of knowledge to protect herself from circumstances no child should face alone. The library had become more than a place of learning for Maya. It had become her armory, her training ground, her preparation for a battle she shouldn't have to fight. The storm clouds had been gathering all afternoon, the sky turning that particular shade of bruised purple that promised serious weather. Elena watched them through the library's tall windows, her attention divided between the approaching storm and the small figure at the corner table. Maya had been unusually restless today, her normally focused demeanor replaced by something tighter, more anxious. She'd made 3 trips to the shelves already, her movements quick and jerky as she gathered materials. The book she currently studied made Elena's blood run cold, a thick field guide to poisonous plants with detailed color photographs of mushrooms and berries. When the first rumble of thunder echoed through the library, Maya flinched visibly, her head snapping up from the book. Her eyes widened as she watched the rain begin to sheet against the windows, the storm arriving with sudden intensity. Elena saw her check the library clock, then her own watch, her small face tightening with what looked like calculation rather than fear. She returned to her book with renewed urgency, her finger tracing quickly through the identification charts. Elena approached quietly, her footsteps softened by the worn carpet. "Quite a storm rolling in," she said, keeping her voice casual. "Do you need to call someone to pick you up?" Maya shook her head without looking up. "I'll walk." "It's really coming down out there," Elena persisted gently. "Maybe you should wait it out." "I don't mind staying late." The child's finger paused on a photograph of death-cap mushrooms. "I can't. I need to get home before dark to check the windows and doors." The words slipped out before she seemed to realize she'd spoken them aloud. Her head came up sharply, eyes wide, with sudden alarm. Elena kept her expression neutral despite the chill that went through her. "That sounds like an important job. Do you often need to check things at home?" Maya's mouth tightened, her gaze dropping back to her book. "Just when my parents are traveling. They're away for 3 days this time." She said it with the weary resignation of someone stating a familiar, unpleasant fact. The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. The survival books, the practical knowledge, the careful self-reliance. Elena's voice softened further. 3 days is a long time for someone your age to be on their own." Maya's composure finally cracked then. Just a hairline fracture, but enough. Her lower lip trembled slightly before she controlled it. "I have everything I need. I've been preparing. But I read that heavy rain can cause flooding in our building's basement. And if the power goes out..." She trailed off, suddenly remembering who she was speaking to. The mask slammed back into place, but it was too late. Elena had seen the truth behind it. Not just a child left alone occasionally, but a system of neglect, a pattern of abandonment that had forced this 9-year-old to become her own caretaker, her own protector. The storm outside was merely weather. The real storm was the one this child had been weathering alone for who knew how long. The silence that followed Maya's hurried departure felt heavier than the storm still raging outside. Elena stood frozen by the reading table, the child's words echoing in the quiet library. 3 days. The field guide to poisonous plants lay open on the table, left behind in her rush to beat the darkness. Elena carefully closed the book, her fingers tracing the ominous cover. This was no longer a collection of concerning observations. It was a cry for help, silent but unmistakable. Her first move was discreet, professional. She pulled up the student directory the local schools provided for interlibrary loan coordination. A quick search confirmed Maya attended Crestwood Elementary, just 4 blocks away. The emergency contact listed only one number, a cell phone with a 212 area code, New York. Elena dialed it, her heart thudding against her ribs. It went straight to a generic voicemail greeting. She left a careful message, identifying herself as the branch librarian, mentioning she'd noticed Maya was a frequent visitor and would love to touch base about her reading interests. The words felt inadequate, a desperate flag planted in shifting sand. Next, she cross-referenced the library's community address database with the student information. The apartment building Maya listed was a known low-income complex, one the library's outreach program had tried to engage multiple times. Building management was notoriously unresponsive. Elena made a note of the superintendent's contact, though she held little hope. Her hands were steady as she began compiling her notes from the past months into something more formal. The checkout history, the observed behaviors, the conversations. However brief. She dated each observation, organized them chronologically, and highlighted the patterns. The alignment of survival topics with school breaks, the increasing urgency and subject matter, the physical signs of neglect. The document grew page by page, each fact, a stone, building a wall of evidence she never wanted to construct. She waited until the storm had passed, the rain softening to a drizzle, then pulled on her coat. The walk to Maya's apartment building took only 10 minutes. The structure was exactly as she'd imagined from community reports: peeling paint, a broken intercom system, and a general air of neglect. She didn't approach Maya's unit. That would cross a line, might frighten the child if she was seen. Instead, she took note of the building's condition, the cracked front steps, the dark windows of what she assumed was the superintendent's basement apartment. An older woman was smoking on the neighboring building's stoop, watching the world through tired eyes. Elena approached slowly, offering a small smile. "Evening. Quite the storm we had." The woman took a drag, exhaling slowly. "Comes through here like a train every time. Basement's probably flooded again." Elena nodded, following the opening. "I have a young patron who lives in that building." "Maya? Small girl, about 9. I wanted to return a book she left at the library, but the intercom seems broken." The woman's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition and something else. Pity, perhaps. "The quiet one. 4th floor, I think. Don't see much of the parents. Kid's on her own a lot." She took another drag, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You from the library?" "Yes. Maya's one of our regulars. Smart kid, always reading. Saw her carrying groceries up last week. Big bags for such a little thing." The woman shook her head, stubbing out her cigarette. "Someone should check on that situation." The words hung in the damp air, a confirmation of Elena's deepest fears. She thanked the woman and walked back to the library, each step heavy with the weight of what she now knew. The investigation had moved from theory to terrible reality. A child was being left to fend for herself, and the system had failed to notice. Until now. The decision crystallized in the quiet of her office the next morning. Elena arrived before dawn, the compiled notes on her desk looking more like an indictment than a librarian's observations. She brewed a strong pot of coffee she didn't really want and picked up the phone. Her first call was to the county's child services hotline. The voice on the other end was professionally calm, methodically walking through a standardized questionnaire. "Can you describe the immediate danger to the child?" the intake worker asked. Elena took a steadying breath. "She's 9 years old. She told me directly She'll be alone for the next 3 days. Her reading patterns at the library show months of studying survival skills, foraging, emergency medicine, weather preparedness. She's preparing to take care of herself because no one else is. She detailed the physical observations, the thin jacket, the worn backpack, the way she carried hygiene supplies with her. She described the neighbor's account. She read excerpts from the checkout history, the timeline of practical manuals that documented a child's desperate attempt to learn how to survive neglect. The worker's tone shifted from routine concern to focused attention. You've documented this thoroughly. We'll dispatch a caseworker for a welfare check today. The police will accompany them if we can't make contact with the parents. Next, she called the non-emergency line for the local precinct. The officer who took the report was initially skeptical until Elena described the poisonous plant field guide, the child's stated reason for needing to get home before dark, to check the windows and doors. She's 9, you said? The officer's voice had lost its casual tone. Yes, and she's been studying how to identify deadly mushrooms and berries. For what purpose, I can only imagine. A longer pause this time. We'll send a unit to accompany child services. What's the address? She provided it, her hand trembling slightly now that the machinery of intervention was finally in motion. She gave her contact information, offered to provide her compiled notes, and answered every question with the grim certainty that had been building for months. After hanging up, she sat in the quiet library, the morning sun now streaming through the windows. The familiar space felt different today. Not just a repository of stories, but a witness to a real-life drama unfolding in its shadows. She thought of Maya, likely waking up alone in that apartment, perhaps already consulting one of her manuals about what to do if the power went out again. The image was unbearable. She made one more call, this time to the principal of Crestwood Elementary. The conversation was more circumspect, professional to professional. She expressed general concern about a frequent young patron, mentioned the observed signs of possible neglect, and learned that Maya's attendance was regular, but that parent-teacher conferences had never been attended, calls home never returned. The school had noted concerns, but lacked the specific evidence Elena had gathered. They promised to pull their own records and coordinate with child services. The calls complete, Elena began her normal opening procedures, turning on computers, unlocking doors, preparing for the day's patrons. But her attention remained divided, her ears straining for the sound of the phone, her thoughts with the authorities who were hopefully already on their way to Maya's door. The library opened at 9. Maya usually arrived at 3:45, 6 hours and 45 minutes. Would she come today? Would she even be able to? The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Every ring of the phone made her jump. Every sight of a police car through the window caught her breath. She helped children find picture books, recommended novels to teenagers, assisted seniors with computer questions, all while part of her remained focused on that fourth-floor apartment across town, willing the intervention to happen, hoping it wasn't too late. The 2 officers arrived at the apartment building just after 11 a.m., their patrol car pulling to the curb as the caseworker's sedan parked behind them. Officer Miller had been on plenty of welfare checks, but something about this one felt different. The librarian's report had been unusually detailed, painting a picture that went beyond typical neglect concerns. The building's front door was unlocked, the lobby dim and smelling of damp concrete and old cooking oil. The elevator was out of service, a handwritten note taped to the doors. They took the stairs to the 4th floor, their footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Apartment 4B had a faded welcome mat and a child's drawing of a rainbow taped to the door at adult eye level. Officer Rodriguez knocked firmly. Police officers and child services. We're here for a welfare check. Silence from within. She knocked again, louder this time. Maya, it's the police. We want to make sure you're okay. A faint sound from inside, the scuffle of footsteps, then the click of multiple locks being disengaged. The door opened just a crack, one brown eye visible in the space. Yes? Officer Miller knelt to bring himself to eye level with the child. Maya? I'm Officer Miller. This is Officer Rodriguez and Ms. Evans from Child Services. We heard you might be here alone. Can we come in and talk with you? The door opened wider, revealing the child the librarian had described. She looked smaller in her own home, swimming in an oversized t-shirt and pajama pants. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were wide with apprehension. The apartment behind her told its own story. Neat, almost painfully clean, but sparse. The furniture was minimal, a worn sofa, a small table with one chair, no television. But what caught their attention were the systems Maya had created. A row of labeled water bottles stood by the kitchen sink. A hand-drawn chart on the refrigerator tracked emergency supplies, with check marks beside items like batteries, canned goods, and first aid materials. A small backpack leaned against the door, packed and ready, a printed list of emergency numbers tucked into the front mesh pocket. Ms. Evans from Child Services stepped forward gently. Maya, we're here because we're concerned about you. Can you tell us where your parents are? They're on a business trip, Maya recited, her voice flat. They'll be back on Thursday. And you've been here alone since when? Since yesterday morning? Her eyes darted toward the kitchen, where a note was stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. They left instructions. Officer Rodriguez moved to read the note, while Officer Miller kept talking with Maya. The instructions were detailed: meal suggestions, emergency contacts, reminders to be good and keep the apartment clean. The business trip excuse was there, but so was something else, a list of household chores that would be daunting for an adult, let alone a child. Meanwhile, Ms. Evans was gently asking Maya to show her around the apartment. The child's bedroom was the most telling space: neatly made bed, clothes folded precisely in drawers. But on the desk, instead of toys or art supplies, were stacked survival manuals from the library, bookmarked and annotated. A composition book lay open, filled with careful notes about emergency procedures, first aid techniques, and, most disturbingly, a list headed, "If I get sick while alone." The kitchen inspection revealed a nearly empty refrigerator except for some milk, bread, and a few canned goods. The cabinets held more canned foods, all organized by type and expiration date. A small box was labeled "Emergency Only" with protein bars and bottled water. Officer Rodriguez checked the bathroom. One towel, one washcloth, minimal toiletries. The medicine cabinet contained children's pain reliever and some bandages, but nothing that suggested adult supervision. Ms. Evans sat with Maya on the sofa, her voice soft but professional. Maya, how often do your parents go on these business trips? The child's shoulders slumped slightly, the careful composure beginning to crack. Sometimes once a month, sometimes more. It depends. And you stay here alone during those times. A hesitant nod. I know what to do. I have my emergency plans. She gestured toward the charts and prepared bags around the apartment. The library has books about everything. I've learned a lot. The three adults exchanged looks over her head. This wasn't just occasional neglect. This was a pattern, a system, a child who had been forced to create her own safety net because the adults in her life had failed to provide one. Ms. Evans made the decision quietly. Maya, we're going to need to take you to a safe place while we try to contact your parents. Can you pack a few things you'd like to bring? Some clothes, maybe a book or two? The child's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart, Officer Miller said, his voice gentle. You're not in trouble at all. We just want to make sure you're safe and cared for properly. As Maya went to her room to pack, the adults spoke quietly. This is one of the most organized neglect situations I've ever seen, Miss Evans murmured. She's literally created systems to survive her parents' absence. Officer Rodriguez nodded. The librarian was right to call. This goes way beyond occasional latchkey kid stuff. When Maya emerged with her small backpack, now containing clothes, and notably 2 of her survival guides, she looked even younger than her 9 years. She paused to carefully unplug appliances and check that the windows were locked, movements that spoke of long practice. As they led her from the apartment, She looked back only once, her eyes lingering on the emergency supply chart on the refrigerator. Then she squared her small shoulders, took Miss Evans's hand, and walked out into the hallway, leaving behind the home where she had learned to parent herself. The ride to the emergency shelter was silent except for the hum of the car's engine and the soft click of the turn signal. Maya sat stiffly in the back seat beside Miss Evans, her small backpack clutched tightly in her lap. She stared out the window, not at the passing buildings, but at her own faint reflection in the glass. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of relief so deep it felt like exhaustion, and a fear of the unknown that made her knuckles white where they gripped the strap of her bag. At the shelter, a place called Sunflower House, the reality of the intervention began to take shape. A kind-faced woman named Maria greeted them at the door, her voice warm but professional. She showed Maya to a simple, clean room with a bed that actually looked comfortable, not just a piece of furniture. There were no charts on the wall about emergency procedures, no lists of survival priorities, just a bright yellow sunflower painting and a window that looked out onto a small garden. Ms. Evans explained the process gently. There would be a medical checkup, not because she was sick, but to make sure she was healthy. A caseworker would help try to contact her parents. For now, this was a safe place to stay where meals were regular and adults were always present. Maya listened, her eyes taking in every detail of the room, every word from the adults, filing it all away like the survival facts she'd memorized from her library books. The first true moment of understanding came when Maria brought her a plate with a sandwich, an apple, and a small bag of chips. "Lunchtime," she said simply, placing it on a small table. Maya stared at the food, then at Maria. "Is this for me?" she asked, her voice small. The question, so innocent and yet so revealing, hung in the air. A child who had managed her own meals from canned goods for so long couldn't comprehend a prepared plate, offered without condition. Maria's smile was gentle. "It's all for you. And there's more if you're still hungry." She left her to eat, understanding the need for space. Maya ate slowly, methodically, as if unsure when the next meal might come, even as she was being told it was guaranteed. The habits of survival, carved deep by necessity, would not vanish simply because safety had arrived. They were the scars of her situation, and their healing would take more than a single afternoon. The discovery process unfolded with methodical precision, each layer revealing deeper neglect than the last. When authorities finally reached Maya's parents, David and Susan Wright, on their New York business lines, their reactions spoke volumes. Not panic, not concern for their daughter's well-being, but irritation at the interruption. They confirmed they were indeed out of town for a 3-day financial conference, their tone suggesting this was a routine occurrence rather than an emergency situation. "Maya knows the drill," David Wright had told the caseworker, his voice crackling through the poor connection. "She's a responsible kid. We've trained her to handle herself." The training manual, when caseworkers eventually gained access to the Wrights' email accounts, was more chilling than any survival guide Maya had borrowed. A meticulously organized digital file titled Home Management Protocol contained schedules, checklists, and contingency plans for their 9-year-old daughter. Meal preparation instructions specified calorie counts and nutritional requirements. Cleaning checklists detailed daily, weekly, and monthly tasks with expected completion times. Emergency procedures covered everything from power outages to minor injuries, each scenario requiring Maya to solve problems alone before even considering contacting an adult. Financial records revealed a pattern of extended business trips, sometimes 2 or 3 per month, with hotel receipts and expense reports showing both parents traveling together while their daughter remained in the apartment. School records showed a perfect attendance pattern that suddenly made sense. Maya couldn't afford to be sick because there was no one to care for her. Neighbor interviews painted a picture of a child who took out her own trash, carried her own groceries, and occasionally asked building maintenance questions that should have been handled by adults. The most damning evidence came from Maya's own documentation. In her composition books, alongside notes from survival manuals, she'd kept a careful log of her parents' absences. 342 nights alone over the past 2 years. Each entry noted the duration, the emergency protocols she'd implemented, and any problems encountered. The clinical detachment in her young handwriting, day 3, power outage for 4 hours, used flashlight system, ate cold beans, checked windows, was more powerful testimony than any adult accusation could have been. When confronted with the evidence, the Wrights initially defended their choices. "We're preparing her for independence," Susan Wright insisted during the first supervised meeting with caseworkers. "The world is competitive. She needs to learn self-reliance early." David Wright cited statistics about childhood resilience and argued that their daughter's excellent grades proved their methods worked. They saw themselves as progressive parents, not neglectful ones, architects of their daughter's competence rather than perpetrators of her loneliness. The court saw it differently. The judge who reviewed the case noted the profound difference between teaching age-appropriate responsibility and systematic abandonment. "Self-reliance is building your own breakfast," she stated from the bench, "not treating your own potential food poisoning because there's no adult to call for help." The Wrights received court-ordered parenting classes focused on appropriate developmental expectations and supervised visitation requirements. Their travel was restricted to one parent at a time, with mandatory certified childcare for any absence exceeding 12 hours. For Maya, watching her parents struggle to understand why their system was problematic became its own form of therapy. In supervised family sessions, she finally voiced the fear she'd carried silently. "I thought if I did everything perfectly, you'd stay home more," she told them during one session, her small voice filling the quiet room. The raw honesty of that statement, the child's belief that her competence would earn her care rather than justify its absence, marked the first real crack in her parents' defensive narrative. The path toward potential reunification became steep and carefully monitored. The Wrights had to demonstrate not just compliance with court orders, but genuine understanding of why their actions had been harmful. They learned about childhood development stages, about the importance of attachment, about the difference between teaching skills and forcing premature adulthood. Progress was slow, often frustrating, with moments of backsliding into old patterns of thinking. But gradually, the parents who had viewed their daughter as a project to be optimized began to see her as a child, to be nurtured. The legal consequences served both as punishment and protection, a structured framework ensuring Maya's safety, while her parents underwent their own re-education in what it meant to care for a child. The system, which had failed to notice her situation for so long, now wrapped around her with multiple layers of oversight, ensuring that her survival would no longer be her own responsibility alone. The transition from survival to safety proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. Maya's first weeks at Sunflower House were marked by a quiet, watchful tension. She made her bed each morning with hospital corner precision, her movements still carrying the ghost of that rigid checklist mentality. She automatically portioned her food at meals, eyes darting toward the kitchen as if calculating reserves. The simple offer of a second helping became a moment of profound confusion, a concept so foreign it required careful examination before tentative acceptance. Dr. Evans, the child psychologist assigned to her case, recognized these behaviors not as quirks, but as trauma responses. "She's spent years in a state of hypervigilance," she explained to Elena during one of their now regular updates. "Her nervous system is wired for threat assessment, not relaxation. Unwinding that will take time and consistent evidence that the adults around her are truly reliable." Therapy sessions focused initially on rebuilding basic trust. They started not with talking, but with doing. Simple board games where the rules were clear and the outcomes certain, art projects with no right way to create, cooking activities where messes were allowed and mistakes were simply part of the process. Maya approached each activity with that familiar analytical intensity, her first paintings looking more like technical diagrams than child's art, her initial attempts at play stiff and performative. The breakthrough came during a session involving clay, Dr. Evans noticed how Maya's hands, usually held with careful control, seemed to remember something older and more instinctual as she worked the material. She began forming not practical objects or survival tools, but a small, lumpy bird. As she shaped the wings, her shoulders lost their perpetual slight hunch. "It doesn't have to be useful," Dr. Evans observed quietly. "It can just be." Maya looked at the emerging shape in her hands, then at the psychologist, and for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. Meanwhile, educational assessments revealed the hidden costs of Maya's self-sufficient years. While her practical knowledge far exceeded her grade level, her social and emotional development had gaps that concerned her teachers. Group work baffled her. The concept of shared responsibility felt foreign when she was accustomed to handling everything alone. Playground interactions were a mystery she approached like an anthropological study, observing other children's easy camaraderie with a mixture of longing and confusion. Her foster family, the Robinsons, provided the steady, patient presence she needed. They established routines, not of survival, but of connection. Family meals where conversation mattered more than nutrition, bedtime stories chosen for enjoyment rather than practical value, weekends filled with activities chosen for fun rather than function. When Maya automatically cleared the table after dinner, Mrs. Robinson would gently stop her. "Thank you, sweetheart, but that's my job tonight. Your job is to go pick out a game for us to play." These small redistributions of responsibility began to rewrite her understanding of family dynamics. The world slowly shifted from a place of tasks to be managed to a web of relationships to be nurtured. She learned that needing help didn't mean failure, that comfort was not a luxury but a necessity, that laughter could be as important as any practical skill. Elena remained a constant through this transformation. Their library sessions continued, but the content changed dramatically. Gone were the survival manuals. In their place came chapter books about friendship, picture books about emotions, stories where characters faced problems not alone, but with support. They read about children who had parents who made mistakes but loved them, about families that looked different but functioned with care. Elena watched as Maya's reading posture softened, as she began to laugh at funny passages, as she sometimes even forgot to take notes. The most significant milestone came 3 months into her placement. Maya arrived at the library not with her usual purposeful stride, but with a slight bounce in her step. She went not to the nonfiction section, but to the new arrivals display, her eyes scanning not for utility, but for interest. She selected a novel about a girl and her dog, a book with no practical application whatsoever, and curled up in a reading chair without even checking the clock. When Elena passed by later, she saw that Maya had tucked her feet up underneath her, a position that would have been unthinkable in those early days of rigid self-control. She was reading for pleasure. She was comfortable. The long road toward healing had found its first true resting place. The courtroom felt nothing like the organized, predictable environment David and Susan Wright preferred. The proceedings were messy, emotional, and utterly outside their control. Their lawyer had advised them to demonstrate remorse, but their expressions showed mostly frustration at the interruption to their professional lives. When the judge detailed the supervised visitation requirements, Susan's pen hovered over her legal pad as if taking notes on a business strategy rather than hearing about her daughter's well-being. The first visit occurred in a neutral family center playroom, a space designed to feel nothing like either home or office. Maya arrived with her caseworker, her posture, that familiar, careful straightness that had returned under stress. Her parents sat on one sofa, she on another, the coffee table between them like a negotiation zone. "Your mother and I have been reviewing the parenting curriculum," David began, his tone that of a manager delivering a quarterly report. The cognitive development module was particularly insightful. Maya's eyes stayed on her hands. "Did you know that children my age aren't supposed to cook on the stove alone? The book says it's a burn hazard." The awkward silence that followed was broken by the visitation supervisor, gently suggesting they might play a game together. The choice was Candyland, a game of pure chance with no strategic elements. The Wrights initially tried to analyze probability curves before the supervisor reminded them the point was simply to play. As weeks turned into months, Something subtle began to shift during these sessions. The forced interactions slowly gave way to moments of genuine connection. During one visit, Susan found herself laughing at Maya's impression of her strict kindergarten teacher, a sound so unexpected that both she and her daughter paused in surprise. Another time, David helped Maya with a math puzzle, and for the first time, his focus was on her thinking process rather than the correct answer. The court-ordered family therapy sessions revealed the deeper patterns. "You've been preparing her for a world you see as threatening," the therapist told the Wrights. "But in doing so, you became the threat she needed protection from." The words landed heavily, breaking through their professional armor. Progress was measured in small surrenders. David learning to ask, "What would you like to do?" rather than, "Here's what we should do." Susan realizing that listening required stopping her own planning to actually hear her daughter's words. Maya tentatively sharing not her accomplishments, but her worries about friends, about school, about bad dreams. The legal consequences remained firm: supervised visitation, mandatory parenting classes, travel restrictions. But their purpose shifted from punishment to protection with a path forward. The Wrights were learning to become parents rather than managers, and Maya was learning she could be a child rather than a project. The accountability was harsh, but the potential for redemption, however distant, became part of the healing equation. The library became Maya's laboratory for social relearning, a safe space to practice being part of something larger than herself. Elena deliberately created opportunities for gradual integration, starting with small, structured interactions. She asked Maya to help reshelf picture books, a task that put her near but not directly with the younger children who frequented that section. She noticed how Maya initially treated the responsibility with grave seriousness, alphabetizing with precision, until a toddler's giggle over a particularly silly illustration made her smile in response. The real transformation began with the summer reading program. Elena encouraged Maya to join not as a participant, but as a helper, recording books for younger readers, handing out stickers, organizing the prize display. The role gave her a sense of purpose without pressure, a way to connect through service rather than social performance. She watched as other children approached the table, their easy requests for the dinosaur sticker or the sparkly one, slowly teaching her the language of casual interaction. One afternoon, a girl about Maya's age approached the table looking frustrated. "I can't find the next book in the series I'm reading," she said, more to herself than to anyone. Maya looked up from her sticker organization. "Which series?" The girl named a popular fantasy novel. Without hesitation, Maya stood. "The hold shelf might have it. Sometimes people return them early. I can show you how to check." Elena watched, her heart in her throat, as Maya led the girl to the computer terminal, explaining the catalog system with natural ease. The interaction ended with both girls searching the shelves together, a conversation about books turning into the beginning of friendship. The library staff became intentional allies in this social rebuilding. They created a Reading Buddies program that paired older children with younger ones, giving Maya structured time to read picture books to kindergartners. The simplicity of these interactions, the way a child would naturally lean against her during a story, the unconditional acceptance in their questions, taught her about physical comfort and emotional connection in ways words never could. Even the physical space of the library transformed in her perception. The corner that had once been her survival classroom became simply a quiet place to read. The practical life skills section lost its urgency, becoming just another category among many. She began to explore fiction, poetry, humor, genres that served no purpose beyond enjoyment. Elena often found her smiling over a funny book, sometimes even sharing passages with other children nearby. The community support extended beyond the library walls. Teachers at her new school implemented a buddy system, pairing her with socially confident students who included her in group activities. The Robinsons arranged playdates that started short and structured, gradually lengthening as Maya's comfort grew. Neighbors who had been briefed on her situation offered casual, low-pressure interactions, helping with gardening, walking dogs together, baking cookies. This network of community care created a safety net far stronger than any survival system Maya had built alone. Where once she had relied on knowledge and preparation, she now learned to rely on people. The transformation was slow, often 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but the direction was clear. She was moving from isolation to connection, from self-reliance to interdependence, from surviving to truly living. Slowly, beautifully, Maya began to bloom. The tight bud of a child, forced closed by necessity, started to unfold in the warmth of consistent care. The library, once her fortress of solitary preparation, transformed into her greenhouse of connection. She no longer scanned the room for exits and resources, but for friends and possibilities. Elena watched this metamorphosis with a quiet joy, seeing the survival guides gather dust while books about friendship and adventure flew off the shelves with Maya's library card. The community wrapped around her like a warm blanket. The Robinsons provided the steady rhythm of family life, movie nights, messy art projects, and the kind of boring weekends that are the hallmark of true security. Her new school implemented a buddy system, and Maya gradually learned the complex language of playground, politics, and lunchroom conversations. Neighbors who knew her story offered gentle invitations, helping to plant flowers, walking dogs together, learning to bake cookies whose only purpose was sweetness. Elena remained her anchor at the library, their relationship deepening from concerned professional to trusted mentor. They read together still, but now they discussed characters' feelings instead of practical skills, debated plot twists instead of survival strategies. One afternoon, Maya looked up from a book about a girl who saved her town through kindness rather than cunning. "It's better when people help each other, isn't it?" she observed. And the simple truth of it hung in the air between them, a lesson learned not from any manual, but from lived experience. The most profound change was in her body itself. The rigid posture softened into the natural slouch of a child lost in a good book. Her footsteps, once measured and careful, now sometimes skipped on the way to the children's section. She laughed more freely, a sound that was becoming familiar music in the library. The transformation was never more evident than when a sudden storm blew in one afternoon, the same kind that would have sent the old Maya scrambling for her weather guides. This Maya simply looked up, commented that the rain sounded nice, and returned to her novel. The community's investment in her healing created a ripple effect. Other children who were quiet or isolated found themselves drawn into Maya's orbit of gentle inclusion. Parents who heard her story became more attentive to the lonely children in their own neighborhoods. The library implemented a new safe space program, training staff to recognize the subtle signs of children who might need help. Maya's painful experience had sown seeds of protection that would shelter other children for years to come. Her parents' progress, though slow, became part of this healing tapestry. Supervised visits evolved from stiff interactions to genuine connections. They learned to listen rather than instruct, to play rather than plan, to cherish rather than challenge. The long road toward potential reunification stretched ahead, but for the first time it felt like a path toward family rather than a sentence to be served. Maya's story became one of resilience, forged in community. The skills she had cultivated in isolation, her careful observation, her systematic thinking, her determination, didn't disappear. They simply found new purpose. She became the child who noticed when someone was left out, who organized study groups with military precision, who remembered everyone's favorite books. Her survival instincts transformed into empathy, her self-reliance into solidarity. The library that had witnessed her silent struggle now celebrated her joyful integration, a living testament to the truth that no child should have to survive alone, and that healing happens best when we surround each other with care.